You'll just stand in the back there. Okay. All right.
Actually,
Hello everyone, thank you for coming. So, I now declare this meeting of the University of Central Florida Pre-Law Chapter of Phi Alpha Delta duly open for business. Let us proceed with the order of business, keeping in mind the principles and ideals of integrity. Courage, service, compassion, innovation, and diversity. Professionalism upon which your fraternity is founded. Well, thank you so much for everyone coming today. And we're going to have a guest speaker, as you guys may already know. And please give a warm welcome to Mr. Juan de la Torre.
thank you, everybody. How is everybody today?
Great.
So everybody wants to be a lawyer, huh? Well, raise your hand. I figure most of you, if not all of you, want to be lawyers in the room. Okay, so I guess the very first, I'm going to ask one more question, actually. How many football fans in the room? Not many, but how many UCF fans?
Yeah.
Everybody's got to be UCF fans. So I wore the jacket on purpose, and I'm suffering the heat penalty for it. But you know, you got to know your audience, right? So I had to rock my UCF shirt today. As a former UCF student, got to rock the UCF shirt. And for my football fans, I also I got the 2017 National Championship shirt underneath. There was only like 3 of you there. It seems like it's a larger group than I expected, and I'm really glad that everybody came out. I told Daniela that I'd be open to taking questions as to what your interests are moving forward in the practice of law or going to law school, or what questions you might have about that. I can't say how much I relate to your UCF experience because mine ended almost 20 years ago. So I'm starting to feel really old. Daniela actually interned for me. One of the funny stories when she started interning for me was when I asked her what year she was born, and it turns out that she was born the year I graduated high school. So yeah, that definitely made me feel old. I basically majored in political science with an emphasis in international relations right here at UCF. I then proceeded to get my master's in public administration, also here from UCF. And if UCF had a law school, I would have gone there too. Not to knock my alma mater, Florida A&M College of Law gave me a law degree, and I'm very proud to have one from there. But I am actually just basically educated all across the board right here in Orlando in Central Florida. If you do make it to law school, some of you might change your mind, especially if you're a freshman. Some of you might change your mind your first semester in law school. Believe me, when you go to law school and you see that people are magically missing, there are no coincidences. There's a false assumption that law school is like undergrad, and it is not. When I went here, UCF was rated #1 party school by Playboy magazine, and I think that it lived up to the bill. I'm sure the parties have gotten better now that you have a football team that actually wins games. Back in my day, we used to hang out in the parking lot. Never really made it into the game because there wasn't much to watch. We win games nowadays by 40 and 50 points. Well, back then we were losing those games by 40 and 50 points. So that wasn't fun to watch. But it was an experience, and one that I'll never take back. If I had to do it all over again, I'd come back to UCF. Maybe I will someday, because I always joke that I'd like to get a medical degree. And UCF does have a medical school, so I'll do that maybe someday in my retirement. Maybe some of you fellow geeks can relate to what I'm saying, because I still say, even almost at 40 years old today, that I'm an aspiring geek. So there's nothing wrong with pursuing your education and trying to learn as much as you can. But like I said, law school is not for everybody. In the first semester alone, after orientation, there was a lot of people I knew from UCF, in fact, that after the first week of class was like, where'd they go? They were gone. After the first year in law school, you will have a similar experience where, what happened to Joe or Susan or whomever, and well, they either flunked out or they transferred, one of the two. So it's a lot more strenuous, and to be frank, I never studied so hard than I did in undergrad. Well, frankly, I didn't study very hard in undergrad. Not to say that UCF didn't give me a good degree, but poli-sci wasn't exactly the hardest of majors either. You basically just have to watch CNN or Fox News, depending on your political affiliation. So that being said, does anybody have any specific questions about the practice of law or the journey into law school? I'd be happy to start off by fielding some questions. Anybody? Daniela?
Yeah, I actually have a question. So I was wondering more specifically on why you chose to go to law school. What was your incentive? And if it's such a hard battle to get there, why do you stick with it?
Well, I think I kind of always wanted to be a lawyer, dating back to when I was even in high school. The classes that I excelled in when I was in high school were my history classes, government classes, and when I chose my major, actually, it was funny, when I got to UCF right at orientation, I was actually undeclared. Mm-hmm. And that week of orientation, I went through the course catalog book, and what I basically did was, I think it was an empirical approach. It worked for me. It seemed to be somewhat pragmatic to do it the way I did it, that I went through the entire course catalog and highlighted every course that I would be interested in taking. So when I was done with that, poli-sci seemed to have the largest number of courses that were of my interest. So I declared for political science, emphasis on international relations. And unlike some of my buddies who made lots of fun of the way I chose my major, I never changed majors, and a lot of them did 2 and 3 and 4 times. So, you know, some of you who are freshmen in the room will find that you might cross that bridge, that, you know, where the route that you're going down is not for you, and that's completely okay, because the practice of law is demanding. It's stressful. Daniela worked with me, and I can say that while we try to keep a very lighthearted and even to some extent comical approach to what we do in the office, I do that from a managerial standpoint, trying to let my staff know that, hey, you know, I am a nice guy, but there will be a flip of the switch, and you know, nice guy has to leave, and we have to get down to business, and things got to get done quickly. And I always think that from a team building exercise, that's always good to have your staff know you both as your real self and then your work self as well. No more questions.
So you said you got your master's in public administration?
Worthless degree, don't get it.
That's my question.
Yes.
Why did you pursue a degree in master's in that?
Well, I think that part of telling my story is so that you guys can learn from my mistakes. So that's an important aspect of, I think, of passing on some mentorship. Believe me, I never thought that at 39, right, well, when I was your age, I never thought I'd be on this side of the podium giving this speech and offering some insight to 19, 20, 21, 22-year-olds. So to answer your question, I did mention I wasn't a very good undergraduate student, right? So my GPA wasn't as high as I would have liked it to be when I graduated from law school, from undergraduate. And I thought I could pad my resume going into law school by getting a graduate degree. While some of my public administration degree has been useful to me in my political career, which I did mostly in my 20s, I was a political consultant before I became a lawyer. I did that for about 10 years. I started doing that while I was in law school. At the end of the day, I think that to a certain extent, the administrative side applies to what I do, because I'm not only a lawyer, but I'm an entrepreneur. I own my own practice. I can tell you, this is eons away for you guys that haven't even been to law school yet, but if I was speaking to a law school class, I can tell you that it's completely different running a law practice as opposed to working for someone or at a bigger firm, or maybe the public defender's office or the state attorney's office. They're two completely different things.
I actually have like maybe 3 questions.
We got the 2-3-part question.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, okay. So my first one was, do you recommend going to law school straight out of undergrad, or maybe just taking little time and just seeing like gap year?
I think that depends a lot on you as a person.
What did you do?
I didn't take any breaks between any of my schooling. I was raised in a household where it was like, if you're taking a break, you're basically saying you're not going to do it. So, and there's a huge danger. You know, you get out. Well, I don't know if it is a danger. Like I said, law school's not for everybody. Let me make that clear. So, there is a year to find yourself, if you will, and you might find that law school wasn't for you. You know, so you might end up working in whatever your undergraduate degree trained you to do. Or like many of us end up working in some completely unrelated field to what you went to school for undergrad. And I think that year could be useful in that context. As far as, in my case, I knew I wanted to go to law school. In fact, I have a joke, because my master's degree, I actually said this to Daniela when she was interning for me. My master's degree is probably the longest master's degree ever. I was about 9 credits shy of earning my master's in 2005, and I had some issues that I'm not going to get into right now because we're on Facebook Live, and you all go here, you might know the professors or not, but you get what I'm trying to say. So I took a leave of absence from my master's degree because precisely I didn't want to continue prolonging going to law school. I actually applied really late in the game. I applied to 3 schools, got into 1, and I was like, I guess I'm going there. And that's how my law school experience went. But it was mostly, to be honest with you, it was just a moment in my life at about 24 and a half, almost 25 years old, where I just decided to pull the trigger. To me, it was a now or never moment. Yeah. Like, it was like, either I go to law school this year, or if I continue putting it off, I'm not going to go. So I went, I got my law degree, passed the bar. Now it seems like it's been forever. I graduated from law school in 2008. It's now 2019, so it's about 11 years now. And I've been practicing out of those 11 for almost 10. So time flies by. So one thing I will caution to you overachievers and super geeks in the audience, okay? College is supposed to be fun. Now, mind you, I probably had too much fun, but college is supposed to be fun, and it's supposed to be that one moment in your life where you got kind of 1 foot into being an adult and 1 foot still being back there being a kid, and you know, you should have a good time and not be like, you know, all stressed out about grades and trying to overachieve. Not to say, don't put yourself in my situation, keep those grades up. Then you won't have to try to invent ways to get into law school when the time comes. So, but you had multiple parts to your question.
I do. Daniela told me what area that you practice.
Mm-hmm.
Can you like go into emphasis? Why did you choose these areas, and let everyone know what areas?
Well, I mean, the old adage is if you do what you love, then you're not working, right? Mm-hmm. So, you know, there's so many different fields. Some people get into it for the money. And believe me, the money is important and it helps. You can't run a business without making money. Yeah. You can't pay your employees without making money. And in my case now at 39 years old, that I have 2 children and a household to support, you can't support your family without making money. And all those quality of life issues that go along with that. Because you know, even at my age, I'm still figuring things out like you guys are. The things I'm figuring out is that I don't want to work all the time. You know, I want to take more vacations. You know, while I love what I do, it doesn't define who I am, and I need to make time for my family and for the other things that are important in life. So I'm preaching balance is a lot what I'm preaching right now, is that, you know, have a good time in school, take care of your schoolwork, but don't be all, you know, in one direction. Don't be all school, 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 and on the other hand, don't be all party, party, party either. So to answer your question, I'm the son of an immigrant who, both my parents immigrated here in the 1960s. And my mom became an entrepreneur, and I don't know, she's just an inspiring story to me. She built her own business in the 1980s, was highly successful, was running a 7-figure business in the 80s in the fashion industry, which you ladies have huge advantages from created by the women that came before you and the men that helped them open doors, in the sense that you don't have as many challenges as women did in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and so on, and obviously even before that. That being said, I know that there's still many challenges with equal pay and other matters, but that's why you ladies are here, getting your education, becoming potentially lawyers, and going out there and fighting those battles. So that might be a passion project for you, who knows? And in my case, my passion project was looking at my mom as an immigrant and a woman in the 1980s in a fashion industry that was still primarily run by men at the time. Do it big. And to this day, I have 3 degrees, run my own business, and I look at my mom, at what she did with little to no English, and she still speaks English with like a heavy accent, and so little to no English, working in a man's world, and just did amazing things on her own. And I still feel like I can't live up to her, and I'm the one with the 3 degrees, and she has none. At least no U.S. degrees. She did get a college degree back in Colombia, where my family's from. But that's part of what inspired me to get into immigration work. And then after that, when I was working in politics, I worked for mainly nonprofit organizations dedicated to the advancement of Hispanic issues such as immigration. So I worked for an organization formerly known as National Council for La Raza, which today is known as Unidos Now. And when I was working for NCLR, we primarily worked a lot on trying to push the issue of immigration reform. And so naturally, I think it was a fit for me. That was my true passion project when I came out of law school, was to jump straight into immigration practice. And then the other parts of my practice include criminal, family, and I do some spin-off corporate and business litigation as a result of the fact that I do I do investment-based immigration, which is a lot of startups, foreign investors coming to do startups in the United States. So I get a lot of spin-off business and doing business-oriented things for them. And there was a part C.
Yes. It's just like, I've been feeling iffy, about, because now I work at a law firm, and it's just made me realize, like, I'm not sure what I want. I'm interested in the criminal field, and I don't know what to do in my life, so I just want to know, like, what advice. Like,
Well, the first piece of advice,
the
first piece of advice I'm going to give you on that is you have time to figure that out, okay? So don't put so much pressure on yourself and like, I need to figure this out now. Yeah. Generally speaking, when you go to law school, you are becoming a general practitioner. Law school does not teach you to emphasize in a particular area of law. There are basically 6 or 7 core tenets for law, which include constitutional law, contracts, evidence, criminal procedure, criminal, and contracts. And I know I'm missing 1 or 2 in there somewhere, but basically those are the core tenets. Those are the required courses in year 1 and year 2, kind of like an undergrad where you're required to take your basically general education classes in your first 2 years. It's the same way in law school. The first 2 years of law school is basically all your main components. After your second year, or sometime during your second year, you can begin to take electives. And then in those electives, you can start to kind of emphasize in what particular area of practice you might want to go into. Not absolutely necessary, although I'm a big proponent, and especially after 10 years of practice, that I do think that there should be some professional reform to the legal profession. Unlike doctors, we're not required to do a residency. And you can basically jump straight out of law school and start practicing. And I've nothing against the audience. I wore my UCF shirt to try to appease the audience. But I think that at 24, 25 years old, what did I know? I don't know. I didn't know much. So of course, Daniela will be the first one to tell you that at 24 or at 25 years old, I thought I knew everything. So at the same time, wisdom and experience is the greatest teacher in life, much more beyond what your education can give to you by itself. And remember that a lot of the things you learn in books are theoretical. All right, even in law school, you're learning the basic concept of law school is that the law is like a foreign language. And if some of you are taking law classes now, you read cases and you're like, what does this mean, right? Well, you don't know what it means because you haven't learned to speak the language. Once you learn to speak the language, you begin to understand what those words on the paper mean. So it doesn't make sense because it's in English, and you're like, this should make sense to me. It's English, right? But the jargon and the words that are involved are very important, and that's in big part what you're learning to do in law school. But let me be very, very, very clear, and I tell it to my first and second year law students, even my undergraduate interns. The educational process at most law schools will teach you nothing, absolutely nothing, about the practice of law. That you have to learn by doing, which is why I am a proponent of there being some type of residency requirement for the legal profession, as for example, there being a requirement to be a state attorney or to be a public defender or to work in some type of legal aid or some other environment that would allow you to obtain the tools to understand things like motion practice. And my funny story is how to schedule a hearing. When I first went into practice, I went into practice at the height of the economic recession. I graduated in 2008, the market crashed. In 2010, we were still at a peak recession. And I was at that point leaving a political job where basically it's after November and the funding stops, your donors stop, and Black Friday comes around and a bunch of people get laid off. Well, I was there thinking, well, I got a master's degree and I got a law degree, and I helped put this thing together. They're not gonna lay me off. Well, I got laid off. So, I found myself at that point at 29, 30 years old with no job, mortgage payment, 2 car payments, 2 kids and a wife, and I had to make something happen. And I was pounding the pavement, literally old school. Yeah, you guys don't do that. You're like, oh, Monster and Indeed, and but I'm old school. Like I wanted to shake a hand and hand you a resume, and I still feel that the way to find jobs, even though I haven't worked for anybody, so don't take my advice on that because I haven't worked for anybody for about 10 years. I often joke sometimes when I get stressed out in my own practice that I just want to shut it down and go work for somebody else. And then my other colleagues that work for themselves are like, Juan, you're unemployable. You can't do it. You're not going to take orders from anybody. you're just not going to do it. So when you get used to calling the shots in your own office, it's hard to go to somebody else's office and then have them tell you what to do. But like I was saying, it was hard to find a job, and I hung up my own shingle, right? But I knew nothing about the practice of law. And the funniest thing that ever happened to me was that I called the judicial assistant. Those are the assistants that work for the judges. And I said, ma'am, I'd like to schedule a hearing. And she says, well, did you file your motion? And I said, well, no, but I'd like to reserve some time. Can I reserve some time and then I'll file the motion? She was like, counsel, it doesn't work like that. She's like, did you graduate yesterday? And I'm like, well, yes, I did. So my point is, obtaining practical experience, doing internships. I always tell you to Daniela that she's well ahead of the game because she's been doing internships and getting to know. You're working at a law firm. So you're actually a lot further ahead of the game than you think you are. I mean, in my law school, sometimes there were second year, third year law students that hadn't done any internships. So how are you supposed to know what you like if you don't do? You learn by doing and by weeding out what you don't like. Okay, so like maybe, I don't know what type of firm you work at. What type of firm do you work at?
Allen B. Taylor and Associates.
Okay, I didn't tell you to use the name. We're gonna bleep that out later. But seriously, what do they do?
Corporate law. So he does corporate, probate, family, yeah.
Okay.
He's-
And you're
He's a
figuring
consumer
out,
also.
and don't answer this question because we are live on Facebook, and I don't know if he's a colleague of mine or not on Facebook. So don't answer this question. I'm giving you the disclosure statement there. But you're figuring out right now whether those are areas of law that you like or don't like. You know what I mean? And that's the practical aspect of doing those internships is to get your feet wet with areas of the law that you are going to like or not like. I enjoy criminal defense. I enjoy criminal defense mostly because my immigration practice usually keeps me behind a desk, and I am not a desk person. So I had to mix up my practice with something that would put me in front of a podium because, as you can see, I don't need a mic. And whenever I'm in court or in a speaking engagement, I say, oh, this thing's not working. Don't worry about it. I don't need it. Can you hear me in the back? Yeah. See, I've always had a voice that carries, so even when I'm trying to be quiet, I'm still being loud. And you got another one.
Yeah. Did you get nervous at first when you had to, like when you first started trial? You know, when you were speaking in front of everyone, were you like really scared? Like, was there ever a bad?
Well, I still get butterflies in my stomach, especially before a big hearing. But for any of you who played sports, because that's the only analogy that I know, I chalk it up to pregame jitters. Today my favorite sport is soccer, but back in high school I actually played football, and the notion back then was that once somebody cracked your head, once you first got that first hit in, the jitters went out the window. Now you're just playing the game. So it's weird, but it's kind of like the same. Once you step up to the podium, that you might have some, and then you get an objection, and you're like, okay, and then you look at your notes, and you're like, oh, I'm in the zone, And there's literally kind of a level of focus that goes into it that I can't explain. It just, you become zoned in. There's a lot of multitasking, especially in a trial atmosphere or anything that involves an evidentiary hearing, because you're taking notes. Your client's whispering in your ear. My advice is hand them a piece of paper and say write it down, because I give them a piece of paper and then I just look down on it and I determine whether what they think to be a huge deal actually is a big deal. 90% of the time it's not, because your clients tend to think that everything is a big deal. And you're listening to the judge, you're listening to opposing counsel, so you're juggling quite a few things in that context. And if it's a jury trial, well then again, going back to knowing your audience, when you're trying to convince a jury of what happened as opposed to a judge, those are two completely different things. Yeah. Well, you know what? You have already gone. All the way back.
I have a question about your resume when applying to law school. Are there any other important points that you suggest other than internships for kind of getting that practical experience?
Well, I mean, I don't know how much stock law school is going to put, and mind you, I applied to law school almost 12 years ago, so I may not be the best person to give you that advice. But there's two things that are still reign true today, I think, and that's your GPA and your LSAT score. So, make sure that you keep that GPA high and keep a good GPA. And number two, work on that LSAT score. Now, personally, my philosophy on the LSAT was take it once, and what you get is what you get. Study for it, prepare for it, but take it once, because they're going to end up averaging the two scores anyway. So unless you do that tremendously better, and some of you may or may not be test takers. I wasn't. I was not a test taker, and I passed the Florida bar. So if I can do it, right here.
You said the first 2 years of law school, it's like going over like basics. Is there anything you're supposed to go in, like information you're supposed to already know?
No, it's like the LSAT itself. There's nothing really legal about the LSAT. They don't expect you to know anything. Just like kind of when you come to undergrad, there are a lot of things you don't know, right? But in law school, you're a blank canvas, and they're gonna put a lot of information in your head. And I remember one conversation I had as a 3L. So for those of you that don't know, when you're in law school, basically first years refer to themselves as 1Ls, second years is 2Ls, 3Ls is 3Ls, etc. Was I had a conversation with a 1L when I was a 3L, and I said, law school should change the way you think. And they gave me the, well, I'm never going to change who I am. And I was like, I didn't say you're going to change who you are, but if you don't change the way you think, then you're throwing away the money, man. Like, why did you come here? Like, seriously, you're supposed to change the way you think. And I'll make a poignant example. Not only the way you think, the way you write, the way you organize your thoughts. Remember that a lot of you might be doing, a trial team or, debate club or any of those other things. Organization of your thoughts and your arguments matter. Not only on paper, but when you're verbalizing them before the judge. You don't want to start off with your weakest argument, right? You want to start off with your strongest argument. One thing that I think really stood out for me, because I came back and I finished my master's, ironically enough, after I finished my law degree. And when I finished my master's degree, I took my last 3 courses, and those professors that I was actually talking about, a couple of them were still teaching. And they actually remembered me. And they actually remembered how poor my writing was. And I think they were candid about it, because they were like, dude, your writing got better. Like, a lot better. And that's my point. I mean, if you don't get in there and get better, then why are you doing it? I mean, everything that we do, even in business today, I made X last year. So what? I still got to come out the gate at 0 next year and do it all over again. So every year about November, well, actually, right, even now, October, November, December, we start planning ahead to what are the changes we're making for next year to do things better and to do things more efficiently. So for those of you that might be double majoring in business, you might know what I'm talking about. Which, by the way, if there was something that I think I would have double majored in, considering I run my own practice, it would have been business. Anybody else? I'm trying, you haven't gone yet.
I have, but she hasn't gone.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right here.
So what is the biggest challenge that you have about running your own business, like running your own practice? Because I'm thinking about doing the same. And I'm a little nervous as to what that entails, because I know you said it entails a lot of like the business element,
Yes.
in addition to like the actual practicing of law.
Well, of course.
So
yes,
what's the
right.
biggest challenge that you've experienced thus far?
Well, my story begins, like I remember I said I was pounding the pavement, couldn't find a job, and decided to hang up my own shingle. Well, I didn't have a shingle, and I just realized that expression might be flying completely over your head, but the expression refers to hanging up the roof over your head, having your own space. The biggest challenge for me then was, well, one, you got to find clients, right? That's any business, and like I said, I think you keep shaking your head. Are you double majoring in business? No? Anybody double majoring in business or taking any business classes? We got one right here, right? So, tenets of business, right? If you don't have clients, you don't have a business. That's number one. And you can ignore that. If you don't have clients, you don't have a business. So that's the first thing. So marketing is important, right? Because you need to market yourself, you need to get out there, and you need to find clients. I didn't have an office space. I got some help along the way. Today, he's a Congressman Darren Soto. Back then, he was a lawyer. And the congressman and I were friends, and he did one of the nicest things. So those of you that are voting next year, seriously, re-elect the congressman. But I'm not saying that whether you're Democrat or Republican, I move beyond that. I move to the people. And something he did for me I'll never forget, and that's just the kind of person he is. He does that on a frequent basis, is that he says he knew I was going through a hard time. He said, Juan, if you don't have a place to meet your clients, you can use my conference room. And I started finding clients, and I would meet him in his conference room, and then I made some money, and then I was like, you know what, can I rent a room in your building? And then I rented a room in his building, and then I did that for a while, and then Then I formed some partnerships and we got offices together. And today I run my own shop, my own office, my own staff, but that was 10 years in the making. So there was a lot of hard work built into that. So getting a front of cash to start your business, you're gonna have to make up with that with a pretty hard work ethic. So that's number one. So if you're not willing to put in the time, then running a business as a startup, as an entrepreneur, is not for you. Okay? If you're looking for a 9 to 5, you need to stay at the state attorney's office, public defenders, or some other type of job where you work 9 to 5. But I worked extreme hours, crazy hours. I don't work them as much anymore, but I've also put in my time for almost 10 years, and I feel like I don't need to be at the office every day till 9 or 10 o'clock at night, although I have plenty of those still. So marketing, bookkeeping, you got to manage trust accounts. One of the biggest things that you hear about in law school is that you cannot mess with your client's money, okay? They'll forgive you for being an alcoholic, they'll forgive you for using drugs, they'll forgive you for getting arrested, they'll forgive you for getting DUIs, they'll forgive you for all of that stuff, but you steal your client's money and then you will lose your bar card in a heartbeat. That's the number one thing. So management of your trust account is extremely important, and not commingling your client's money with your money. And then, there's cash flow issues. Those are tenets of business that, I just didn't understand. I learned the hard way, which is why if you're taking business classes and you look to be an entrepreneur, that's a really important thing, because there's cash flow. Like, how do I hire staff? How do I know that I'm going to be able to pay their paychecks at the end of the day? Because my problems are not their problems, right? My staff still has, I got 2 of my staffers right now have their own families, right? So they got their own 15th that those checks are going through. You know what I mean? So those are the things that I mean, that on top of the practice of law, none of those things have to do with the practice of law. So one of the things that I did to manage that in my new practice, I would say, in the last 3 years, was that my new office manager handles all my administrative things, bookkeeping and stuff like that. I got my wife working on most of my marketing, and the goal has been for me to actually sit down and practice law, because I can't bill my hourly rate of $300 an hour doing bookkeeping. You know what I mean? I can do that if I'm practicing law. So they try to keep me focused on actually sitting down and doing legal work throughout the day, as opposed to doing minutia that's not going to get us paid. Because at the end of the day, everybody benefits from me doing that work, because of the fact that means the business makes more money. That means my office manager gets paid. The legal assistant sits up front, gets paid. The interns get paid. Everybody gets paid, and that's how everybody stays happy. Yes, right next to you. I'm going to come back to you, Danielle.
That's okay.
I'm trying to give everybody a chance.
How did you establish your network in law school?
Do you mean by your network as in your business network or colleagues?
Well, I've heard that it's crucial to start networking as you move throughout law school, and so that you can get a job eventually.
Right.
So.
Well, you hit two very important things. I still find that you get jobs by knowing people, and getting your foot in the door. On the other hand, in terms of business and even in terms of your professional community, it's very important that you build a network. It's helpful. Let's just, one of my best friends in the world, that we both went to undergrad here. We used to be partners, in fact. One of the things that he used to say to me when we were first starting out is like, just think about the psychology of it. It doesn't mean the judge is going to do you any favors, but think about what your client feels like when you walk in through that door and the judge says, "Good morning, Mr. Torre, how you doing today?" Think about that. Think about how good your client feels right now, like, he knows the judge. You know what I mean? Again, ethically, that doesn't mean that the judge is going to give you any favors, but where that comes into play is into your reputation. If the judge knows you to be someone who is credible, forthcoming, and not somebody who's going to try to pull a fast one on him, she used to jump on the phone all the time. So if you need to,
Yeah.
It's 5%.
We have 5%.
Oh, well then we'll wrap it up. What time do we got?
Like
5 minutes. So, to answer your question, those things are very helpful. Not only in terms of your reputation and within your community. You want to be known as a lawyer. And they're going to tell you about this. First day of law school, I'll never forget it. Okay, that was the first thing at orientation. You want to be lawyers. Your reputation is everything. Okay, and we all know, we've heard about this in terms. At least I hope you have by now. In terms of, it takes you so long to build a reputation, right? But one bad thing, because unfortunately, I don't know why people are hardwired that way, but people sometimes tend to remember the bad rather than the good. You could have done 1,000 good things and they remember the one bad thing you did. You know what I mean? So being consistent, being forthcoming, especially when you're making arguments, you know, when a judge asks you, is there any is there any, case law that's against you, be forthcoming and say, yes, Your Honor, there's this case that says this, but make your counter argument. I mean, you'll learn about jurisdictional aspects. Some of you might have taken some legal methods and stuff. The DCAs matters, the circuits matter. So maybe your argument is that, yes, there's a case that says something else, Your Honor, but it's not controlling, not in this jurisdiction. But being forthcoming and having the judges know that that's your reputation will give you the benefit of the doubt the day that you're not sure, or that your argument is not black and white and it's on the fence. So building your network is very important. And I'll add one last comment to that, and this is advice I will give to any aspiring law student, and to those who are thinking about transferring from my 1Ls that are sometimes thinking about transferring to another school. Don't get yourself so much in debt. Okay? I'm still paying student loans, and they are a pain in the rear end. Don't go to a school that costs $50,000 a year, unless, of course, there's always an exception, unless you're going to a top tier school. If you get into a top 10 school, if you get into Harvard or Yale or Princeton or George Washington, and I don't know if George Washington is still ranked that high, but and NYU, I think NYU was top 5. Columbia, I think was top 5. You get into one of those schools, go. You'll probably end up in politics, but go anyway. Most of those students end up, their salaries per capita coming out of law school tends to be lower than other schools, but it's usually because they all end up in the public sector, working in DC or something like that. But I think that aside from that, and if you're not going to a top tier school, go to school where you intend to live, because that answers your question. How do you start building a network? How do you know people? How do you, basically in my case, I go to court. I see people I know all the time because I went to law school with them. I went to school in Orlando. I went to UCF here. So that the network that you're talking about didn't get built overnight. I've been building it for 20 years. You know what I mean? So, my internships were here. I still run into my mentors, and it's funny, we're colleagues now, and we go to happy hours together, and they give, the advice I'm giving to you, I go to them for. I'm like, hey, dude, I got a pickle here, and I got this case, and I'm having trouble figuring out. You've been doing this for 40 years. Can you help me figure it out in 10 minutes or less? You never stop asking questions. You always keep learning, and I think that the biggest thing that I had to extend, I don't know everything. But I have been doing this for longer than you guys have. And I'll give you one last final example as to how important that really is. Just the time factor. My father is 87 years old and he has Alzheimer's. And he's not in good shape.